their side. Here, here.
In times of crisis, we allow governments to requisition civilian assets in national interest. As countries around the world face unprecedented challenges, what we need is public oversight over the use of land. We cannot fall prey to malevolent private interests. What is the role of land? Land is a crucial economic asset, allowing people to earn an income through various uses, such as agriculture and production. It is also crucial for the provision of any government services, such as public housing, schools, and hospitals. Historically, the majority of land was privately held by a rich upper class, and with the inheritance and accumulation of wealth, most land today is still in the hands of rich individuals or private corporations. In South Africa and the US, black individuals own a vanishing minority of land due to a history of official racial discrimination. In fact, in many cases, land is unjustly acquired, so owners have no strong moral claim to the land to begin with. Crucially, this comes at a time when many nations are experiencing shortages of available land for development. Mounting pressures from the climate and booming populations means countries are increasingly desperate for land to provide crucial services, just as it is not available. Policy: 1. We will place expiration dates on land ownership. 2. We propose a model in which land sold has an expiration date set at the end of one generation. This ranges typically from 50 to 90 years, and the duration will be varied based on purpose and buyer. 3. At the end of that period, the land will be returned to the government. The government can then put it up for sale in the open market, repurpose it for public use, or sell it to a specific buyer for a stated purpose, which can include the previous owner. Criteria governments usually use to decide between such options include the type of development needed or equity, such as selling the land to less well-off individuals. Case divide: 1. We better provide public services. 2. We solve government need for land. And 3. My second speaker will show how we reduce speculation on land prices. First argument: we better provide public services for citizens. This argument will prove how we better the usage and development of land specifically for provision of public services. The poor and the middle class rely heavily on government services because their private alternatives, like private schools and hospitals, are too costly. The problem on opposition is that public services will not be provided when the majority of land is privately held. As mentioned earlier, this is because land is held by upper class or by companies who enter in the early phases of development. The private sector will not provide accessible services because 1. Services provided will need to be for profit and hence not affordable enough to be a public service. For example, if a private developer builds housing, his incentive is to build luxury homes priced out of reach for the poor. 2. Even if it was infrastructure that was being built, businesses have no incentive to share the infrastructure. Hence, they will remain exclusively for the use of these corporations, such as building water pipes only into your building and no one else's. 3. Corporations are beholden to shareholders and not the public interest. Hence, the public cannot influence what the companies do. Opposition's model of private ownership is exactly what we see in Hong Kong, where developers effectively control the supply of housing and can set high prices to profit off homes. The government also holds on to insufficient land to build affordable public housing. This has led to a major housing crisis, where the average home costs a family 21 times their annual income. That is why many Hong Kongers live in squatter homes, while most will never own a home. Our solution is to place expiration dates and allow the government to collect back land at the end. If the need arises for more land for public services, it can be done so at no cost. The government can also avoid paying exorbitant amounts of money for land from private companies. Why are governments then better at providing public services? 1. They provide accessible services. Without a profit incentive, their goal is social benefit, and hence they are willing to make a loss to allow services like schools, housing, and healthcare to be cheap. 2. They provide quality services. They are accountable to the needs of all their citizens through voting and citizen activism, and hence are willing to go the extra mile to make such services reliable for citizens to use. Yes?
But we in the status quo already have hospitals and things like that. Why don't we just, for a relatively small amount of actual buildings and land that they use, have to destroy things such as private property?
In reality, governments around the world actually lack land for public services. In fact, in many of the areas where public services need to enter, such as poorer districts, there is a majority of that land in the hands of private corporations and richer individuals who rent it out to the poor. We much rather have that land in government hands where they are able to use it to provide public services. Back to my argument. Perhaps governments are not perfect at representing the poor all the time, but this debate is about comparatives with corporations. Therefore, it's insufficient for opposition to claim alone that governments are bad or inadequate. Second argument, we solve government need for land. The premise of this argument is that governments have a frequent need for land. This could be for public services, to use for state land, or simply as land to sell to generate crucial government revenue. When land is held in perpetuity by private owners, governments have insufficient land for their many users. There are two methods for land to be acquired there, and both methods are highly problematic. One, land is purchased from the open market, usually for the government to repurpose. In this case, governments are forced to compete with their own citizens for land, inadvertently driving up the price of land. This is likely to have a market-wide impact, as the government frequently has the need to buy land for its many users, like hospitals, schools, and city offices. Governments, also end up wasting limited funds which could have been used in more pertinent areas like welfare. Yes?
So you admit to give the entire power of deciding where the land goes to government solely?
We think that for most democratically elected governments, they are able to take a wide range of measures and properly allocate the land. For instance, through consulting experts like economists or through other stakeholders that are involved in the allocation of land. Back to my argument. Secondly, this is typical when governments need land to sell for revenue or cannot afford the land they need. They end up claiming land from where they face the least opposition. They reclaim land from rainforests, hurting environmental conservation in the nation. They also reclaim land from indigenous groups or squatters, since they have little political influence as minorities or because they do not vote. This leaves them homeless and out of their livelihoods like agriculture. This is exactly what happened in Brazil, where as part of a push to commercialize more land, large portions of the Amazon rainforest was cleared. The slums in Rio were also forcefully torn down by the police and bulldozers, leaving thousands of families without shelter. Our solution is for governments to have a natural supply of land, as expiration dates of sold land are staggered. This means that when governments sell the land, they put in particular processes and ensure that land is sold at different times of over a long duration. As such, governments can frequently collect back land every single year for their own purposes or to sell it for crucial government revenue. This meets the government's needs all the time for land while providing crucial government revenue by allowing the resale of land. And this is important because government revenue is what's channeled into many other services that citizens need, for instance, hospitals and schools, and through many other welfare programs that allow for greater equity in society that the land-owning class have denied us for so long. So in summary, land has many critical uses, including public services and government revenue. Only with expiration dates do we have proper oversight and better allocation to maximize societal good. Because perpetual land ownership perpetuates poverty, we propose.
We thank the speaker for those remarks. Now I'd like to invite the leader of the opposition party to begin the debate to their side. Here,
Just a second, please. Saying private property is redundant. Public property is an oxymoron. All legitimate property is private. If not private, it is stolen. And this is the very principle of team opposition in this debate. Side proposition in this debate doesn't really solve the core problem of society, which is inequality between the poor and the rich, and that's exactly what I'm going to explain throughout my speech. So what's the case on team opposition in this debate? Firstly, I'll be presenting our first substantive point about private property, while our second speaker will be talking about the disproportionately affected poor and middle class that is happening with government's model. So let's start with the framing or rather stance of team opposition in this debate. So here we tell you, in a few rare cases where there is a large public interest in taking away your land, for example, building a highway which is necessary for the state actually buys off this land from the market from the market price or even a higher price. price. These are very rare examples where this is needed for the country's infrastructure, and this directly rebuts a part of their second substantive, telling you this is already happening in the status quo.
Point of information.
No, thank you. When we have this, making this pretty much unnecessary if this is our sole goal. Furthermore, we tell you land isn't the biggest cause of inequality in the status quo. No, this refutes the impact of their first substantive. Today in the capitalist society, wealth is not accumulated through land ownership. No, thank you. Land is not necessary to produce valuable goods, and what's on the land is more important, meaning that a small area of the land is enough to accumulate wealth. Today, wealth is actually accumulated rather through the exchange of goods, ownership of company shares, and the exchange of information, data through the internet and so on. So if we want mass distribution of wealth, we shouldn't really target land, but tax and regulate these goods. This is, for example, progressive tax that actually target the rich, and pretty much through good social infrastructure like we see in Sweden and Denmark through higher taxes is given to the poor, giving them good life standards, and that's a good model we actually would support, not this one. So today, so we tell you, if not, we would just take the minimal safety net from the poor and still not harm the rich. For example, one of the richest men today, Mark Zuckerberg, has a net worth of $74.5 billion, which he accumulated mostly through his website and his mass company share, not land, while the biggest private landowner in America has a net worth of only $7.2 billion. From this, we can see that land is not crucial for making money, land is not crucial for having inequality in the world, and that's the exact sole problem Team Proposition never gives a solution to. We tell you pretty much in their model, if the state only puts these houses back on the market, the rich can simply, through having more money, can simply buy the land, and furthermore, if it's only given to the poor, they still don't really have enough money to either buy rent, to afford education, and other things like that. We completely support like free medical insurance, but this is not the way we actually achieve it, rather through other ways of tax and so on. Moving on to their second substantive, where they pretty much talked about the Amazon rainforest and port districts. Firstly, about the port district, so we tell you, well, land is cheap there. Furthermore, through accumulation of wealth, the poor actually have, through their own private land, without their model, an opportunity to simply build out through the generations their wealth, meaning they can actually fend for themselves in a longer period of time. Furthermore, when they talk to you about the Amazon rainforest and this problem, this is simply an example of the corrupted government that pretty much use this land for commercial reasons and not because of any of the reasons they've stated. And that pretty much makes this argument not really that relevant. Now moving on to our substantive point, but before that I'll take you.
You claim all legitimate property is private if not stolen. So why do you support progressive taxation?
So we support progressive taxation because it actually targets the rich who have enough money to care for themselves, even though they have when it does not harm them as proportionately to the poor. We tell you this is a method we actually use to help them. So now we're talking about property rights. So we oppose the motion because it violates our right to property. Four points in this substantive. Firstly, what's the right to private property? We tell you this is the right to control our possessions, money, lands, and shares, and this is the freedom and ability to control how we use it. That also means being able to decide when do we want to get rid of it and then under what price. And why is this private property so important? It enables us to advocate for our other rights and influence our lives. We need property to afford almost anything. In order to have a bank account, to be allowed education, healthcare, and other things necessary for life, we need to actually have a place of residence. So in case of land, we tell you this is the ultimate safety net. When you own land, it makes it near impossible for you to lose everything. You always have a starting point to come back to, and it protects you as long as it's yours. You always have insurance that with the land you can pretty much start over. You have a place to live, or you can simply make profit out of it, from rent, from selling, from growing crops, or anything else. We tell you land is always equally important and will always bring profit. Land is a resource that actually makes progression in society much easier. It covers our basic needs, such as food, shelter, and general comfort. Through this, we actually have a feeling of security, and that's why we are more willing to take risks and make investments to start a business, get more educated, change our jobs, and so on. So this is especially important for people living in rural communities who can't afford to move. They are tied to that land because they have no money to buy another house. They probably grow at least some of their food. Property rights improve the quality of life. We tell you through accumulation of wealth, this is the only way in which poor actually accumulate wealth is exactly through land. Also, this is important in unstable environments where there are inflations, political tensions, and a weaker economy in general, where mostly poor people live. It's the only safe property you can rely on. You can derive value from your land regardless of the situation in the market. So thirdly, how does an expiration date violate this? How does propping violate private property? The state takes our land away for arbitrary reasons. It takes something of sentimental importance, an achievement we worked for, and something that was crucial for our life, for example, farming, with no or not enough compensation. So why is all of this bad? What's the impact of this substantive? We work less. People mostly work because they want to buy land for themselves or their family. So having a place of your own to live and invest in is a dream and goal for many. Land is the goal, the only investment for most people because it will always have value and it is the sole basis of any other purchase. And most parents actually work so they can provide a home for their kids in the future. By implementing this, we're taking away people's motivation to work. Secondly, it's no longer profitable because the value of your property is literally decreasing with each day. The expiration date is coming closer, meaning you will not be as likely to invest in any of this. Investing in our property is also dropping because today people put tremendous amounts of dollars for the future, building a new facade so they can count on it later, but this is no longer relevant to them, and we're not progressing in society because we're no longer taking risks. We're afraid we're going to lose our house, lose our job, and that's exactly what private property actually ensures us, a good living. And that's why it's clear opposition wins.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the second speaker for the government to continue the debate for their side. You're here.
Team opposition proudly say that land is the ultimate safety net, and that land is super important to achieving all of your basic needs. I think the key assumption that undergirds their case is that in society everyone has a little piece of land, and that land is equally distributed and is contributing to everyone's basic needs all the same. But we told you in Canada that really wasn't true. That the majority of land nowadays is owned by private corporations, people who stole it in the era of colonialism, and by rich families who have no intention of ever giving up that land. Insofar as we can prove to you on our side that not everyone owns this land, their logic works against them. If land is really so important for basic needs, they need to prove to us how on their side of the house everyone is going to get their little piece of land to be their ultimate safety net. I'm going to answer 3 questions in this speech. First, is the right to own land inherent to human beings? Second, which side is better for development? Third, where do governments get land on opposition? So first, is the right to own land inherent to human beings? And here I'm going to address their main point as substantive and first speaker with 2 broad responses. First, we think that property rights aren't fundamental rights, like the right against slavery. Property rights are assigned to protect society, and if we can prove that their case harms society, we can override property rights. Here's a clear example. Kenneth gave them a POI about taxes. Presumably, your money still counts as part of your property rights. But as they say, if there's a large public interest, we can override these property rights. So as long as we prove to you the rest of our case that we benefit society, we can override these property rights. Second response, we think that that the moral claim of landowners to the land in many cases is extremely weak. Private corporations who exploited previous landowners by paying them a pittance and chasing them out of their land. Even worse, land acquired during colonialism and the eras of apartheid, literally stolen from minorities. We think that vast amounts of land is owned and acquired unjustly, and we don't think that we ought to respect property rights in these cases. So as the main pillar of argumentation you heard from first opposition, gone. The next thing they say was that rural communities are tied to the land. Well, maybe this is true, but in the vast majority of circumstances, they don't own that land. So while it is true that rural communities need the land to survive, they literally have no official title deeds and are living on the goodwill of evil profit-making corporations. We think that on our side, it is only when this land lease expires, then we are able to give it to these rural communities and we're able to let them continue surviving. So on the point of rural communities, is a clear benefit for our side. Let's look at the second question. Which side is better for development? And the first thing I'm going to address under this point is the issue of inequality. They claim that the main problem of inequality is through company shares in wealth. They give the example of Mark Zuckerberg having lots of wealth. Well, we don't doubt that's true. We think that, we agree, company shares in wealth do contribute to a vast amount of inequality, and that's really regrettable. We agree completely with their side that progressive taxation is a great idea, and we'll do that too. But we think that land also contributes to this inequality. Literally, they say only $7.2 billion is created by land in America. They proudly say this to explain how there's no inequality. Guys, we think this is absurd. We support progressive taxation as well, but we think that land inequality exists too. That is something we need to get rid of. You know what? All the logic that they say about how land is a safety net, how land helps you with your basic needs, that's exactly why we ought to distribute it. Even if land doesn't contribute to your earnings, the fact that it helps you with your basic needs, as they say, that means we need to distribute it better. Next, on how governments need land. We told you in Canada that this clash was most topical in land-scarce regions like Hong Kong, like Tokyo, the Netherlands. Kenneth explained to you how in land-scarce areas, government control of land is crucial to maximize its use for society. Their policy seems to agree with us. They say if there's a large public interest, we will just buy that land at higher than the market value. We told you this was not an option. We already preempted this in Kenneth when he said that first, it's costly to governments of developing nations. Second, when you pay it above the market rate, you contribute to speculation. And as I'll tell you later, that's a really bad thing for the economy. We also give you structural analysis why governments are able to make better use of the land. We talked about transparency, better regulation, public oversight. Far, far better on their side than private corporations who only want to make a profit. We think it's not a small need at all. We think that hospitals, schools, roads, bridges, public housing, this is all severely in shortage. So don't let them claim, hold on, that Hong Kong has enough houses, that Colombo has enough hospitals, or that Kuala Lumpur has enough schools. We don't think this is just not true. There is a huge need for this land to be redistributed. Sure.
Okay, you want to solve inequality and we think that's great. But why won't you start with something that messes up poor people less, such as progressive taxes, than something that also messes up with the poor people as well as a little bit with the rich?
We reject that our policy messes up poor people. We don't think that our policy is going to hurt them at all. We think that actually, if poor people are tied to the land, the governments have every incentive to just renew the lease and let them continue owning it. What really we're going to target is the land owned by private corporations and private individuals. The final thing I want to talk about under this clash is how land is underutilized on their side. What they say at the dying minutes of their speech is that the value of property is decreasing, so you don't invest. That's not true. When people own the land forever, they have no incentive to invest because the land is always going to be there whenever they want to use it. It is only when you have an expiration date that you're pushed, you have to invest now. You have to reap your returns in the next 50 years. If not, you won't get to reap those returns. That is when we push them to invest even further. The final argument that Kenneth gives you is unresponded to by their side. He explains that acquiring land is simply not an option, and therefore they turn to other things, like taking protected land or land of indigenous people who have no title deeds, for example. The only line of response we hear is that, oh, it's a corrupt government that does this. That's not true. I don't think the vast majority of governments in the world are corrupt. Look, even if it's a benevolent government, they simply need to get land from somewhere. And insofar as opposition has given us no alternative as to where they're going to get the land from, the most likely option is things we told you about. They take it from rainforests and nature reserves. They take it from poor individuals with less lobbying power. They take it from indigenous people who don't have official title deeds to sue the government. None of these options are acceptable or conscionable on our side. I'm now going to move on to our team's third and final substantive on reducing speculation on land prices. This is a new and independent reason why you should vote for proposition, because it explains to you how we prevent housing market crashes and underutilized land. The central claim of this argument is that as land loses value closer to the expiration date, we prevent speculation on land prices. Why is this claim true? There are two problems we solve when it comes to speculation. First, people buy land solely for the purpose of selling it. They don't intend to develop anything on that land, but they just wait until its value rises and then they sell it to turn a profit, meaning that that land remains unused. Secondly, people speculate on the value of land, buying land and then quickly selling it off when it rises in value, meaning that prices fluctuate and the land constantly changes hands without any chance to develop it. We solve both problems via our mechanism. On proposition, land loses value as it approaches expiration date, something they agreed to in first speaker. This is quite obvious because land with 45 years left on its lease obviously is a higher price than land with just 3 years left. And this is important. On proposition, it is no longer profitable to hold on to land in the hopes that the value will rise later, because the value will always go down. This solves the problems I talked about earlier, because people no longer hold on to land indefinitely, waiting for the prices to go up, and speculation stops when land prices constantly decrease instead of fluctuating. Why is this a good thing? There are 3 outcomes we want to achieve here. First, land is used better. On proposition, landowners are pushed to develop the land when they can't sit on it, waiting for the prices to rise. Second, land prices are not artificially inflated by speculation. On proposition, land prices decrease and become more affordable to the poor. Third, prices become more stable. Speculation creates market crashes, like the one that catalyzed the 2008 financial crisis when prices fluctuate. Bubbles are created when people buy land not for the value of that land, but purely for speculation. And when we reduce this, we avoid these crashes that are disastrous to people's livelihoods and the entire economy. The case of the proposition is this: we reduce speculation and prevent housing crashes, we distribute land more fairly, and we make best use of it to help the most vulnerable. Perpetual land ownership perpetuates poverty. I am very proud to propose.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the second speaker for the out to continue the debate for their side here.
Our economic freedom is founded on individual property rights, and therefore governments should never be allowed to take these property rights away, especially not from the weakest ones in our society, the poor and the middle class. So what is going to happen in this speech? Firstly, about the strategy of the side of proposition and how is it actually inadequate and bad. Secondly, about their substantive and our substantive material rebuttals and defenses. And thirdly, our second substantive talking about the poor and the middle class here. Firstly, we are telling you that we see a clear shift in strategy coming from the side of proposition, because what they tell you in their first speech is that what they're basically going to do with this land is redistribute it to social services, meaning hospitals, schools, etc. And then what happens in second speech is that all we hear is, okay, let's give this land to the poor, probably let's give this apartment to the poor people, nothing about social services anymore, nothing about the hospitals. Also, their strategy here is clearly, okay, companies acquire this land in a bad and illegitimate way, so let's push them away from these territories in which they have built their companies, etc. But we are telling you here, okay, industry is an important part of governmental economy, and this is actually the most important factor of the quality of life of the poor, especially because they mostly depend on their employment, which would be harmed if they were to be pushed out. Also, what we are telling you here is that you have to make a reality check here. Firstly, this debate is not debated solely in the Western countries, and this would not be implemented only in the Western countries. And what we are telling you here is that basically what is happening is that all the governments around the world are being corrupted, especially when we talk about the weaker countries. The weaker the country is, the worse economically it is, the more corrupted the government is. And what we are telling you here is that governments who are corrupted mostly tend to do things that are in favor and in interest of companies, and generally the people who fund their political campaigns, etc., the lobby in general. And this is the reason why we are telling you that probably none of this would happen in the ways that the team in Singapore is debating here, but rather actually in the interest of the rich, of the privileged, and of these awful companies they claim to be. So what happens with social services in this debate? Firstly, the land is not the problem here. You're telling me that you have a school in a poor neighborhood, you just need many money to pay for teachers and maybe build one more floor and a few more classrooms. So when the problem is money, we are telling you that firstly we do not have it right now exactly because the governments are corrupted and they do not care about the poor. Secondly, what we are telling is that you can acquire money and cash through progressive taxes, which can happen on our side as well, and other measures that are not so detrimental to the poor. Secondly, what we are telling is that the rich and companies do not have land in poor neighborhoods when you need these hospitals and lands to be built. They have land in rich neighborhoods or elsewhere where their companies are being built, meaning provinces, etc. Thirdly, we are telling you that if these